You could try to fit a square peg in a round hole all day and yell from the rooftops, hey, customers, this is who we are. But if your customers are seeing you and perceiving you in another way, it may be time to actually listen to what they're trying to tell you instead of trying to force them into a behavior change.
Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox, Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have Brit Tucker, who's the VP of Product, Technology, and CX at Society6. Welcome, Brit.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. It's really cool. Obviously, you and I have known each other for a couple of years, so it's excited to see your kind of career and how it's evolved and how you've gone through different businesses. But I'm assuming everyone wants to hear it from you and not me. So maybe start off by kicking us off with a bit about your career journey and how you ended up in your current role.
Yeah, definitely. I actually started my career in the advertising agency world. I was fortunate enough to work for a large agency and a couple boutique agencies that worked with a lot of CPG brands. And that was really my first sort of foray into the world of brand. It was pre-ecom days, really. Not many brands had a .com site at the time. And so a lot of the work was centered around brand building and more of the traditional verticals. And then I transitioned into a role that was building websites for brands. It was kind of on that cusp of the mid 2000s, and brands were starting to build their brand website and very early e-com websites. And so that was my first taste, so to speak, of the digital product and technology side of the ecosystem. And then I transitioned over to the brand side. I've largely been on the brand side for the last decade and started out in digital marketing, taking with me my agency experience and helping to build brands like Pure Barre and help them scale in the digital ecosystem when they've largely historically had depended upon word of mouth and more traditional advertising. Digital was up and coming. It was in that role that I was given the opportunity to launch their streaming platform, their workout streaming platform. And that little taste, so to speak, got my spark lit on building websites again. And so all the opportunities I've really looked at since then have been in the digital product space and helping brands reimagine their digital ecosystem, their own digital ecosystem, and lots of replatforms in that journey as well as a result of that, and just helping brands modernize who they are and how they can leverage their tech stack in a way that is more efficient and more impactful for them.
Very cool. And looks like your specific role now is an amalgamation of a lot of different functions. So maybe talk to us a bit about why you believe having, in some cases, well, candidly, it looks like over the last couple of years, we've been centralizing product, technology, user experience under a single VP, but it wasn't all that uncommon 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago to have multiple VPs overlooking this. Why do you think it's so critical that it's centralized under one person?
I think when it's disjointed, it can work if you've got really strong collaboration across the leaders and a shared vision and understanding of who the customer is. But when you're in smaller organizations, it is really beneficial to centralize the voice of the customer. I think when you have the engineering team, the product team, and obviously the customer success team close to the customer, you're always thinking about your decisions through that lens. And that can get lost if all of them are disjointed, because then it becomes the engineering team and technology team, they're the voice of the ecosystem, and then the product managers are the voice of the business, and then the customer success team is the voice of the customer. And you start to develop this siloed and disjointed approach to understanding who your consumer is. So I really do believe that when you are able to centralize it sort of under the moniker of customer experience, the teams can work more collaboratively together and have a closer line of sight into the voice of the customer, not just when they're complaining, but when they're actively engaging in the site and understanding their behaviors a bit better. Helps us solution better. And it's easy to think revenue or conversion, but if you're not having conversations with the customer, that can really create a fracture in your strategy. And when you have all those departments under one, it makes it easier to do that.
Very cool. And obviously you've led multiple transitions for businesses like Beauty Counter, Lulu in Georgia, and most recently Society6. Maybe Talk to us a bit about some of the muscles that you've built for replatforming. It sounds like you've done a bunch of them. So maybe talk to us a bit about replatformings from a high level and where you've seen them go really right and where you've potentially maybe seen them go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, replatforms are such a massive undertaking for a business. I think one of the biggest ways that a business can go wrong from the outset is not have the right intentions and outcomes in place before they even kick off that project. Oftentimes, I feel as though brands, when I've had conversations, not just with the ones I've done, but just in the ecosystem with other leaders, when they've approached a replatform, sometimes if you're thinking it's going to be the silver bullet to your business problems, you're probably setting yourself up for failure because the website and the technical ecosystem is really just one or two parts of the overarching challenge of running a digital business. So I think it's really important that brands are really clear at the upfront about what it is that they are striving for and why they want to replatform, and that there's alignment. I always say, if you ask all of your leaders in an organization, why should we replatform? If they all have a different answer, then you're not ready to replatform. Everybody should be aligned on the same reasons why. I think when you're doing a replatform, the muscles that are really important to have to build after the fact is a culture of experimentation, because otherwise what happens is as the brands move on to the next shiny object, the next new feature, the next technology, and they ignore all that work and investment that they made by moving on to the next thing. So they're not even optimizing the thing that they spent, in some cases, 2 years redesigning and replatforming to build some shiny new object. And then before you know it, you're back in the same situation where you're having to evaluate, do we replatform or start over from scratch because we've ignored the technical debt and optimizations we should have done over the years. That's the biggest watch out, I honestly would say, is that it's that combination of the replatform will be the silver bullet, and then not adopting an experimentation culture on the other side to optimize this product that you just spent probably a lot of money and a lot of resources to birth into the world.
It's very interesting. And I've seen personally, not overseen, but I've chatted with brands that have done, typically it kind of falls into one of two categories for replatforming. They're leaving all the content and the user experience more or less the same, and they're replatforming, and all it really is a different back end and technology stack. And then I've also seen it where they're also taking it as an opportunity to either refresh their brand, change their UI UX, or maybe associate it with a pivot. Maybe talk to us a bit about, sounds like your most recent one was more so on the latter side. Talk to us a bit about that, because I've heard those be kind of described as a bit riskier than the former because you're changing multiple things at the same time. So maybe talk to us a bit about how you navigated that. And yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to my earlier point about what and why do you want to replatform. I think in two of the cases when I've replatformed, we've fully redesigned at the same time. And part of that was the existing version of the site had been around for years and hadn't been touched and hadn't been optimized. And in the case of Society6, we wanted to really focus on our pivot towards being a retail-driven, like, merchandise brand. And in doing so, that meant we wanted to reimagine the user experience and the user interface so that it had a more elevated look and feel. So it is riskier because now you have more dependencies in your timeline. I'd say for brands that are exploring it, it's really critical that you're realistic about the timeline. I think some brands can certainly replatform and redesign in a year, but most brands can't, dependent upon where you're migrating from and what you're migrating to. If you were on a fully custom tech stack before, on top of doing a redesign, which was the case with Society6, it can be extremely complicated and you're introducing more variables that can bloat your timeline. And that's just a realistic expectation that it's important for brands to adopt. And at the same time, dependent upon how you're resourcing that project, you may just want to level set with the rest of the leadership team that you're not going to be able to work on anything else during that time frame. So it is a big risk because you're likely saying, okay, we're not doing anything. We might launch some new product in there, but we're not going to optimize the existing site because it's going to be completely overhauled. I think the other thing I'll add to that is that don't go into a redesign without research, because that's going to make the outcomes a lot more risky. So in the case of Society6, we had done a lot of research leading up to the decision to replatform and redesign. And then as part of that engagement, the partners we worked with did a lot of research at the upfront and then user testing throughout. And then when we launched, I had my product designer run a usability study in Q4 last year. That way, we're just constantly getting that feedback. Again, leading into the culture of experimentation, but there's a lot of extra guardrails you have to put in place if you're deciding to redesign and replatform at the same time.
Very cool. And I know that you guys kind of also paired it a bit with Society6's strategic pivot. Maybe talk to us a bit about what that exactly is and why, maybe some of the research and why you guys made that decision.
Yeah, it's a good question. For so long, Society6 had existed as an open marketplace. And for the last several years, as we had conversations with our customers, it was really evident that customers didn't see us as a marketplace. They saw us as a retailer. And that distinction is really important. It's a great example of you could try to fit a square peg in a round hole all day and yell from the rooftops, hey, customers, this is who we are. But if your customers are seeing you and perceiving you in another way, it may be time to actually listen to what they're trying to tell you instead of trying to force them into a behavior change. On top of that, when you think about the pandemic years, so many people went and migrated into the so-called like gig economy in a greater way. And during the years of the pandemic, our catalog size bloated. And this is actually a pretty common trend that happened with most marketplaces, is that their catalog size is bloated to the point where there was a lot of non-additive products on their marketplaces. That ends up in dilution in the experience for the customers and overwhelm. We already know from marketing psychology that customers don't make great decisions when they have too many options available to them, or they don't make decisions at all. They abandon because they're overwhelmed. So we took into account all of these different data points we had from our customers and from the research we had done to identify the fact that it's in our best interest to move towards having a stronger point of view for the growth of the brand and for us to be able to work with and partner with independent artists and that's still very important to us. We still do partner with independent artists as we can start to develop a stronger point of view as a brand of what our style and aesthetic looks like while still keeping a lens on the broader home decor landscape.
Very cool. And maybe talk to us a bit about how that pivot and the replatforming, what were the outcomes in the form of KPIs for bounce rate, conversion, things like that? How did it ultimately turn out for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, with the replatform, I think anybody who's migrating to Shopify is certainly looking at the lens of the benefits that Shopify's checkout affords brands. And so we were lucky and or crazy, whichever you want to call it, to launch the site before Q4 really kicked into high gear and have the site in a really solid position going into the holiday. And that really helped our Q4 holiday season. And we're continuing to see KPIs like add to cart, checkout, conversion really improved as a result of that move. And then obviously we redesigned the site like we were talking. And so those benefits are also reaping the rewards of just better discoverability, better merchandising, and making it easier for customers to find what they want throughout the entire full funnel experience. With the downsizing project and shifting to our curated model, our hope was that we would see more sales across our other artwork within our assortment. And that is certainly the case, especially as our merchandising team has more flexibility and bigger muscle, so to speak, to actually merchandise the site in a meaningful way. Whereas when you have hundreds of millions of designs on the site, it's really hard to even filter through that as an internal team because you have to try to sift through the bottom of the barrel to find some gems. When you narrow the scope, it makes it easier for the team to be more selective about what we're presenting to the customer and have that unique point of view. So it's really a blend across the entire purchase funnel where we've seen leading indicators. I mean, we're not quite even 2 months post our curated marketplace move or curated retailer move, but we're really seeing leading indicators that show that engagement is higher. We're seeing more creative, more designs within our assortment have eyeballs on them and purchases on them as a result. And then, like I said, conversion definitely in a better place. Bounce rate, although I know GA4 doesn't like that metric, engaged users at a higher rate than what we've seen. So we're really seeing that the fruits of our labor pay off with both of those moves from the last 6 months.
And it sounds like kind of during this process, you've also implemented a culture of testing, experimentation. Maybe talk to us a bit about how you brought in a culture of experimenting and kind of scaled it past just one of the teams that you oversee.
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate early in my career to have an ecom leader who really fostered a culture of test and learn. And it's sort of been in my DNA ever since then. I mean, I'm a curious creature by nature, but it's like I was saying earlier, it's so important to think about optimization and experimentation within the culture because it also builds a tolerance for failure. Whereas in organizations, if you're not experimenting, your tolerance for failure is probably pretty low. So, this is a great sort of testing ground or breeding ground to start to introduce the idea of failing forward for organizations. For me, it's a crawl, walk, run approach dependent upon the players in the organization and whether they have been a part of a conversion rate optimization or experimentation program. If they haven't, you really have to start with some small wins. Alternatively, it can be helpful to bring in a CRO partner to help get that program off the ground, and the team can learn while working alongside that partner. That's a great way to accelerate getting conversion rate optimization off the ground, especially if you're resource strapped. If you have the time and capacity, I think it's a fun endeavor to recruit your internal teams to pursue conversion rate optimization, but I like to do it in a cross-functional way. And so that might look like monthly experimentation meetings where all of the different channels are talking about what they're experimenting on, the results of their experiments. That typically fosters ideas across the organization. Maybe the email team was testing something specific in an email. That might spark an idea for the website team to do something on the homepage or a landing page, or the paid media team is testing some ad creative, but they want to couple that with some landing page testing. The more that we can create that cross-functional, collaborative sort of conversation, the better. And I've done that in a number of ways. Like I said, monthly experimentation meetings, a tracker, experimentation tracker, so we can see at any point what other teams are working on or testing or what's in the pipeline, a Slack channel to talk about our wins and our failures when we're testing. And then I always say this when we're talking about experimentation. If you're proving all of your hypotheses correctly, your tests aren't hard enough. They're not actually helping you uncover the insights that you need. So you need to make sure that your testing strategy is structured in such a way that there is failure baked into what you're testing. I want our A/B tests to fail. Not all of them, obviously, but it's important that you understand both the upper and the lower bounds of the customer experience, not just all of the wins, because you're probably not testing the right things and you're probably not looking at the right KPIs if all of your tests win.
I love that. Pivoting a little bit here, ecom teams often chase short-term wins because that's kind of how their KPI structure is built. How have you looked at building sustainable growth? What are kind of some of the leading indicators? And do you need to set up incentive plans to align to those?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple answers to that question. I think when you're talking operationally, it's really important that you've got the right process in place, not just any process in place for how the teams prioritize what they're working on. If everybody is striving towards, let's say, one North Star KPI, but nobody's aligned on how you're going to get to that KPI, you're going to end up with siloed organizations, no matter how small or large the business is. So, alignment across the leadership team is really important, in addition to having clear, objective criteria for how you say yes and no to things. It's very easy for businesses, especially in an economy like the one we're navigating right now, where businesses are having to pivot more quickly. It can feel like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall and just saying yes to everything instead of being really discerning about, okay, we could do this, but what does it mean if we do this? Do we have to make a trade-off and not do something else? What incremental impact are we expecting this project, task, or endeavor to have compared to everything else we've already committed to? How much more time is this going to require? Is it a couple days worth of time? Is it a couple weeks worth of time? Do we have the capacity to do it? I think it's so important that we're thinking about that in terms of long-term growth, because if you're only focused on chasing short-term wins, let's say a business has a goal of in 2 years they want to be profitable, but they're so focused on chasing the wins right here and right now. Well, 2 years from now, when they look up at that profitability goal, which say it's here, if they're chasing short-term wins, every little win is a small deviation away potentially from that long-term goal. If that is not kept in sight, you're going to wake up in 2 years and go, wait a second, we wanted to be over there, but we're over here. So I think for me, it's like roadmap governance, alignment across the leadership teams. Everyone's looking at the same KPIs in the same way. It's some of the foundational things as a business that are just really critical, that if you don't have those things, if everybody's defining revenue differently or everybody's defining conversion differently or they're looking at different dashboards, then you're just in a disjointed place that's going to make chasing even the short-term wins harder because we're all looking at things differently.
As we're kind of settling into Q2 of 2025, what are some of the shifts you've seen this year? Yeah, in the e-com space or maybe in the creator economy more broadly?
I think it would be remiss to not point out the fact that the creator economy is like huge right now. The amount of conversations that are happening in boardrooms and at the leadership table related to influencer partnerships and strategy is exploded in a way I haven't seen in my past. I think brands are really thinking about how they can try to leverage more of that one-to-one relationship because that's what the customer's really striving for. That's what they want and what they're craving. They don't necessarily want to just hear from a brand touting how great they are and all the products they sell. They want to hear from somebody else that they trust, whether that is somebody they personally know in their network or it's an influencer they've followed for years whose opinion they regularly agree with or support. So that is explosive in and of itself. And I've seen, at least with Society6, like how we shift our approach to marketing and leaning more on those creators, especially in the home decor space. Like it's so silly to not think about how you can leverage creators and or influencers as a means to support the vision of the brand. I mean, so much of, in the case of Society6, our focus and vision is bringing unique art into your home. You're not going to find the type of home decor items with the prints and the patterns we have really anywhere else. And what better way to show that off than to work with people who are already decorating their homes and already have a following. It's been an interesting way to reach new markets. And when I worked in the natural and organic food industry, that was actually one of the original ways that those brands grew because they didn't have the budgets to spend on paid media. They didn't have the budgets to have a large TV campaign in the way that, say, a Cheerios might have a TV ad. They don't have that kind of money. And creator economy was actually the original way that those businesses grew. And why a lot of those CPG brands in the early days, I would say in like the mid to 2010s, were being scooped up by larger CPG brands because they wanted, one, the growth of those brands, and two, they wanted to take the learnings from how they adopted this creator economy prioritized strategy and infuse it into their larger brands. I saw that happen a lot. So it's interesting to see it come around, but in a bigger way, especially with the rise of TikTok. Like YouTube is having another moment again where creators are leveraging TikTok for short form content and then leaning on YouTube for longer form content. So I definitely see it continuing to grow. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves and if it loses sort of its luster, because eventually you'll reach a point where you've got your creators and your influencers talking about a million different brands. And can you wade through the level of authenticity or not for customers to find what they need? So it may just mean a rise of more micro influencers in that case.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brit. This was a phenomenal episode. Clearly, you've had a very successful career and very successful replatforming. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Karen.
The Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.